All right, and we're live. Welcome to Winterviews, Series 4, Episode 9. I am your host, Catherine Silva, Cat for short. And today we have the wonderful, the amazing Jacy Morris. How are you, Jacy?
I'm pretty good. I feel a lot better after being called wonderful and amazing. So that's nice.
I like to build the guests up. There's the cat. This is a reoccurring monster that appears every episode. Is lemon jelly. Um, so tonight, you're here and we're talking about Indigenous horror. For sorry, I just heard possible mouse in the ceiling, and that's terrifying. For those who might
There's a new
not,
book waiting to go.
yeah, right. It's Willard, but with mice and rats. For those who might not be familiar with your work, although they really should be, we're going to make them be. Can you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Let's see. So I'm a writer, obviously, or else I probably wouldn't be here. I've been writing books for, I can never remember the exact dates. It's over a decade now. I started out self-published and sort of learned my way around that with all the editing and covers and uploading things and doing all the little tiny bits of it. And then as I got bigger and people started liking my books, I started sort of going the more traditional route. In addition to still self-publishing. So I guess I'm kind of a hybrid now. I think I'm up to 27 books, and I have two traditional ones coming out. These are my first traditional ones besides a novella I did. And then I have a pile of other things that is sitting around. I'm waiting for my agent to sell some things. So we'll see how it goes. It's literally a pile. Like, my agent just has to be like, dude, stop sending me things. So and he likes to go one at a time. So
I didn't know that you had two things coming out. I knew about the one, and that's with Tenebrous Press. What's the other thing that you've got coming?
The other one's called One Shot, and it's going to be from Torrid Waters, which is sort of their newer imprint from Crystal Lake Publishing.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So there's that one too, and that's due out in November-ish. But it's been sitting in their I don't know where people keep books when they're a publisher, in their vaults. It's been sitting in their vaults for like a year and a half now. So I'm still waiting to do like edits on that one, but that'll be coming out in November. But yeah, we like it. Cherry will be coming out first.
Yes, which I'm very excited about. I have a copy sitting in my my inbox to read, and I was hoping to get to it this week, and editing got in the way of that certain project that you might be familiar with, and so it's in my queue to read very soon, though, and I'm really excited about it. But let's dial it back. We're going to go back to the beginning here. I want to talk about sort of, you said that you've been in the business for over a decade. Is that?
Yeah.
So I guess I want to start with like the first book that you published.
The first book I published, it is no longer available.
Okay.
I took it down a while ago. I got annoyed by Twilight. I'm known for writing things just out of spite every now and then. And I was like, oh, they're just ruining vampires. I don't even like vampires, but what they were doing was egregious. What vampires were, and so I decided to write my own vampire book, and it was called Unmade: A Neo-Nihilist Vampire Story, if I remember the title correctly. Um, and it was sort of one of those deals where you're just like, I'm going to write a book, and you write it and you publish it, and I found some guy to make a cover for me for like $50, and it was a bad cover, and I like the ideas in the book. It's a fun book. Like the the basics of what I would be as a writer are in there, but it was also my first book with no guidance whatsoever. I didn't have, I took creative writing courses in college. I've always been a writer. I mostly did poetry and then movie reviews for a while. And so this was my first attempt at it. And I just put it out there, and some people bought it. Some people liked it. My one friend still claims it's his favorite book of mine, but he's notorious for having bad tastes. So yeah, so that I think I took it down maybe 5 years into my writing career. I was just like, I am so far removed from this. It's so cringy.
Are you okay? So maybe you're gonna or not. Okay. Maybe not, Kat. All right. So what I find fascinating about that is that both of us, our first books were vampire books in response to Twilight. Okay. Kat, this is, yes, I know. But I think that that's brilliant and wonderful. And I am very sad that that is no longer available. But I totally understand the feeling that like you've written beyond that, and it's kind of just like, yeah, this isn't representative of me as a writer anymore, so I really don't want others reading it. I have one of those in my catalog, and I have not gotten the courage to get rid of it yet. So I understand.
Now I'm wondering how many people have become horror writers because they hated Twilight.
Oh, I'm sure there's got to be a pretty big contingent of us. So, I mean, vampires are just one of those things. It's like, if it's not scary, if they're not scary, then it just doesn't feel right for some reason. But I will also throw out there, for those of you that love Twilight, I read Twilight in high school, and that because that's when it came out. I was of the age when it came out, and it did impact me. It made me want to write vampire fiction. So it did have a positive aspect. It just made me want to write different vampire fiction. So, there's that. And enough about Twilight. So moving on from the vampire.
I guess it kind of counts as Indigenous horror in the worst possible way. It's how not to do Indigenous horror.
Yeah. The I'm sure that there were some problematic parts of the werewolf stuff. As far as your next project, moving on from the vampire stuff went, like what did you move into next? Was it the zombie stuff next?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I also did that one out of spite.
All right, getting a picture here.
I wrote This Rotten World, which has been pretty successful for me, considering I didn't have reviews. It was my second book, so it wasn't far removed from the vampire one. It was just something I probably knew more about and something I probably cared more about. And I had been watching like the timeline goes like the opening of The Walking Dead, the opening of 28 Days Later, and how like people just wake up and everything's dead. And I was really annoyed by that because they skipped over all the good stuff. And I was like, well, I'm going to write this zombie book. I'm going to show all the good stuff. And my initial intention was to write something like probably the length of the unabridged, the uncut Stand, The Stand.
Yeah.
It was to write something like that long about it.
Okay.
And I got into the first book, and I think I got like 65,000 words into it, and like that was like day one of the entire story. And so I was like, oh, okay, that's not. There's just no way I'm going to be able to wrap this whole story up. And so I'm up to book. I'm writing book 11 now. So there's more of them. The original series is probably 1 through 5, and then I sort of changed locations and got a new cast because I had told the other story all the way up to their end, basically.
Okay.
So yeah, now I'm continuing with this cast, and when these ones are ended, I'll probably do another location, another cast. But yeah, I didn't like skipping over all the stuff that happened. Right, that's the cool stuff. Like if I'm talking about the zombie apocalypse, I want to see it falling apart. I want to see real people going through it. So, and people really like those. Yeah.
So in terms of, I have not read any of This Rotten World, which I'm so sorry. I really it sounds amazing. I love zombie stuff. So I would love to read it. Does that series have Indigenous representation in it?
The first wave, not so much. I believe there's one Indigenous character in there. The second wave definitely has more of an Indigenous vibe since it takes place in Wyoming and there's reservations there. The first part of the series took place in Portland, and so it was a diverse cast, but it wasn't diverse in that way. And there was a shift in there where, I've always been an Indigenous person, but I just assumed people didn't want to read about Indigenous characters. My stories were, well, what do white folk want to read about? And that's kind of how I was writing books for, I guess the first two. I think my next one was Indigenous novel, The Enemies of Our Ancestors, where I was like, it's not really about what other people want or finding an audience or pleasing other people as much as it became about, well, I want to write about stuff that I care about. And it always turns out horror, which I never really plan on, but that's just kind of how my brain goes. One day I'll write a really cool, like, just, dramatic fiction book. I don't know when that'll be, but for now, they always just wind up horror. So yeah, the idea of like people telling their own stories and their own tales, it wasn't so popular when I first started reading or when I first started writing. And I had never actually read any Indigenous fiction besides some sort of like dramatic thrillers or Sherman Alexi's books. And they were just not anything I was really interested in, because they were so specific to, reservation life and, really sort of that sort of grind. And that's not really my upbringing or my experience. I'm, more of a city Indian. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. Yeah, I don't remember what I was going to ask. But I like that you kind of adapted and changed thought with the zombie stuff too. But also it's I think all writers kind of get this this thought that it's kind of scary to write your own story, and you're writing for fun, and you're not necessarily there to include yourself in it. It just kind of starts coming out the more and more you write, and yeah, and then at some point it just kind of snaps, and it's like, yeah, I do want to write about me, and I want to write about my experiences and the things that are important to me, because no one else has those experiences. And so your experiences are unique, and certainly in a horror scape. It's there's not too many that I know of, and that's me, speaking through my ass, because I don't know as many Indigenous horror writers. There's not too many, I would think, that have been in the community for as long as you've been writing,
Mhm.
10 plus years. It's yeah, you're kind of a vet, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of weird to think about it because I was never sort of community based when I started. I was just kind of, the person. It wasn't an actual base, but it might as well have been, right? Like I just
Yeah.
write in a vacuum, throw it out there, see what happens, and then move on. And I never really focused on, connections or social media stuff or anything. And it was just, it was just something I did. Um, and definitely sort of, being more open-minded to being part of the community has made a big difference. Like I've met a lot of cool people. I found cooler books to read.
Mhm.
And, the stuff that's usually at the store, to be honest.
Yep.
So it works out that way, and it kind of, there's a little bit of synergy and energy there from being part of the community versus being outside of it. It always felt like daunting to me because I'm like, who am I? I'm basically no one, and so I didn't want to do it. And then I
Sure.
guess I started getting success with stuff, and I was like, well, let's see how far this can go. And that's kind of the track I'm on now, where I'm just like, let's see how far things can go. And it's been fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember, I have a memory from several years ago, being on Facebook and getting an ad in my feed for the Pied Piper of Hamelin, right?
Yeah.
And being like, this looks rad. What is this? And it was your book. And I had never heard of you. But that, it came across in my feed, and I was like, oh, this looks really cool. And I've never heard of this person, and I kind of need this. Um, and and so yeah, Facebook was kind of like the start, I guess, of of my experience of sort of building a community. I wasn't on Twitter or, you know, uh, any of the other socials. So what I saw and did on Facebook was really kind of my only connection to the horror sphere. Um, and your stuff was there, and it was reaching me and several others. Um, and at that point, with that book, because that was not out yet, with
Hmm.
the ads that I was seeing, where is that in the scale of 1 to 27, 28?
let's see. I believe that was probably book six,
Okay.
6 or 7, somewhere in there.
So
Yeah.
actually pretty early. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was one of the ones that I do a mailing list and I give away. I have so many books I can just give away for free, and it's one of the free ones I do on my mailing list on my website. So
Oh, nice.
it's a fun one. It's a weird one. It's dark.
It looked cool. I was totally into it. Um, so we're going to switch gears again and talk about the short story collection that came out last year from Third Estate Books, which is Burying My Heart with a Keyboard. And I had the distinct pleasure of doing the interior format for that, for the paperback, and it was an amazing collection. And it is very focused on Indigenous horror. It's focused on all the difficulties of the intersection of being Indigenous and living in a world that is not always very friendly or very tolerant or understanding of an Indigenous lifestyle and history. And I just wondered if you could tell the audience about your conception of that book and what it meant to you to put it out there.
Yeah, I mean, the conception really came in two chunks, really. Like I never planned on doing a collection. I never really planned on doing short stories, but I was doing sort of writing coaching with some other writers, and they were asking about short story submissions and things like that. And I'd always just been a novelist, and I was like, I don't know, I don't really know much about it. So I was like, well, let me try that, and found a very cutthroat world of, you know, multiple thousands of submissions for some of these places. And, my stuff it tends to scare away a lot of publishers, I think, because it is overtly political, but written in a way that's meaningful. So that half of the book is stuff that just got rejected that, I thought was really good. And other people thought it was really good, but people didn't want it for whatever reason. And then the other half was I had gone to see Carson Winter read from Post Haste Manor, I believe, at a book pub in Portland. And I was sitting there hanging out and, having a few drinks, and I was like, I could do that. And so I walked up to the owner of the place. I was like, what do you got on schedule? When can I do this? And with way too much confidence. And she gave me Black Friday, which was like the only day open until like January. And that was like 2 weeks away. So I signed up, and I was like, I woke up the next day. I was like, oh man, I really signed up for that. So in those 2 weeks, I wrote 7 short stories, six short stories. And those were probably the front part of the book that were all just very Indigenous. I was like, well, it's on Black Friday. That's a silly day to do anything. So I decided to make my event a night of Indigenous horror, just to kind of, push back against the idea of consumerism and buying books. And so that's shaped those. And then when I was done with that, I just had a bunch of cool stories. And I'm usually a one and done person with a short story. I'm not going to try and shoehorn it into like 20 different submissions. So those were basically dead to me. And I approached Aquino at Third Estate, and I was like, well, what if we do this collection? We're trying to do some cool stuff here. I'm happy to donate it, because I'm not going to do anything with them anyways. And so we put it together and we worked on it, and it's really cool stuff. There were 3 novellas in there that were all Indigenous. And again, there's a fine balance being an Indigenous writer submitting to mostly white publishers, where I kind of know I'm true to myself, I'm true to who I am as an artist. And I'm sure that many of them were like, no, this is pushing too hard in the political sphere. And, it's kind of always been a thing in horror where it's like, oh, sure, we're fine with, killing 30 kids, like killing 30 teenagers, and that's hilarious. But the moment you get political, people don't want to hear it. So I thought the time was right. I still think we need to have more political horror. We need to be more accepting of ideas. And, if you ever get a submission from me and it's too political, I honestly think you should be asking about yourself. What do you mean? And why are you not willing to push the envelope? Because if it's for money, you're missing out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember reading some of the stories in that collection and just being like, they're so heartbreaking. The early ones, especially, just really, really heartbreaking. And like, you feel, as somebody who is not Indigenous, you just feel like kind of awful in a way, like,
Yeah.
but not like the fact that those were rejected, as amazing as they were, those stories, like, just kind of being like who rejected this? Like, who would reject this? Like, come on.
Yeah.
It's oh God, they just make you feel. And
Yeah.
they are dark and they are very real. They're not necessarily monster stories or well, some of them are supernatural stories, but it's the reality of it and the discomfort of it is really the thing that's like, yeah, this is the stuff that should be thrown in people's faces a little bit. And it's like, yeah, this is real and this is going on and it is horrifying. And we should be reading more of it.
Yeah, I agree. read more of it.
And the thing is, though, that it's Indigenous horror is having a moment. Finally, it seems like there are more and more Indigenous horror authors creating and being published and having their work shown and spread. And so it seems like we're in a little bit of a renaissance of like, hey, people are actually paying attention. So that's great. And that hopefully the momentum is upward momentum in the kind of Indigenous horror that is being spread. Hopefully it is, not just from a we have to have, we feel like we're including characters that are Indigenous and that's it. There's not, talk about the culture and the history. Hopefully it's more of an outward spread of everything. But I wasn't sure if you had the same feeling about that or not. So I was going to ask you how you felt that that the industry was going right now. If it seems to you like it's going well, or does it seem like we're still kind of missing the point, as it were?
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely more representation, which is fantastic. I've read quite a few books by Indigenous authors over the last few years, which is, I just couldn't find any when I was younger. I think there were a couple people doing it, but there just wasn't, the groundswell of, oh, you got to read this, you got to check it out. So like, a 20-year-old me wouldn't find it. A teenage me wouldn't have found it. I'm going to the store. Now I can go into the store and find, 4 or 5 or 6 different horror authors on there that are Indigenous, and it's nice. It's nice to be included and feel a part of the conversation when it comes to horror. And I've read a lot of them, and they're really good stuff. It's not like they're, a lot of people that don't get out of their comfort zone think, oh yeah, well, they're Indigenous, it's just included because they're Indigenous. It's not really good, but
yeah,
some truly fantastic authors are out there doing really amazing stuff. And I'm happy to have been fully formed as a writer by the time I started reading them, because honestly, like some of the stuff they're doing, I would have been like, oh, well, I gotta do that, But I feel like the Indigenous diaspora is so large and varied. The experiences are so different that it really caters to the fact that as Indigenous authors, we can all sort of be different and have different takes on things. Like Stephen Graham Jones has, that slasher vibe. His stuff is like, popcorn movies basically for horror fans. And there's, the Indigenous undercurrent, even if it's not the point of it. And then there's someone like, Tiffany Morris wrote this one called Green Fuse Burning, which is just like poetry. It's just the most dense, beautiful prose. And I hate the word prose. I don't even use it, but there are certain occasions where it counts. It's appropriate. And those are just, her book was like a vibe. It wasn't about body count. It was about, persons, people, relationships, and it's just totally different. Like those are just opposite ends of the spectrum within the same umbrella of Indigenous horror. And for me, I'm like I said, I'm always going to try and push the envelope for political stuff. And saying something like theme is important to me, like having a point and a message that I'm trying to use to undercut the horror of the whole situation is important. So there's room for it. I look forward to more, Indigenous authors getting out there and hopefully getting more. And that goes for, all groups of people. The more diverse our reading materials are, the better off we all are as far as understanding the world around us. We don't read in our own little bubble, like we shouldn't. So yeah.
No, agreed completely. So with that in mind, I would like to know more about your writing influences. Just like who you read, who you kind of pull from when you're creating the Jacy Morris writer.
Okay, let's see. Influences. I mean, I grew up reading Stephen King, so that was sort of the grounds for how a story's supposed to go. The character development, dialogue, thoughts, like he was doing all of that. I mean, the descriptions weren't necessarily to the level that I like now, but the character development and thoughts, I always felt like they were real people. So that was one thing that when I started writing, I was like, I want these people to feel real. I want them to feel like, even if they're flawed, I want you to feel like that could be a real person, which I think he does really well. As far as the description and the horror bits go, I would say probably Clive Barker was probably more of an influence on me as far as like the gore and the nastiness and not being afraid to really get messy with it. Clive Barker was up there. And then I read a lot of fantasy. And one of the ones that always stood out to me was the initial books of Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. And the ability to juggle so many characters and so many locations and learning to use time and chapters and section breaks. I don't think I would have been ever been able to write This Rotten World without having read those books. And I read those when I was in middle school, I suppose, but they really stuck with me. I like the first couple now, but I wouldn't say they're like great. But the first couple were really fun. And then I owe a lot, probably more to movies than I do to writing.
Okay. Yeah.
So I've been, I was a movie reviewer for some years, where I watched everything. Always drawn to horror. Whatever horror came out, I would watch it. And I did analysis on them. I broke them down and learned a lot about story that way. I learned a lot about scenes, and I would just sit around. I would rewatch scenes of movies, like the ones that really stood out to me. I'd rewatch them and look at how they were built, what's going on, what are the characters doing, and that sort of inspired me to write screenplays. I would write screenplays before, so I think before I even wrote novels, I was writing screenplays, and so I kind of developed a sort of cinematic flair, based upon, like David Cronenberg, John Carpenter, George Romero was a big one. Just the way they would set up scenes and make you care in the moment, is the way that I always felt like books should be. Because, and now when I go back and I see something that's just dragged out, I can't stand it, because it's like it's slowing the whole process down. I think there's ways to do character development and things like that without losing momentum. Momentum is huge for me as a writer, and that's the one thing that I never really found in traditionally published writing, was the momentum, the speed, to deliver like a hammer blow of a story to people. And I think that's the one thing that I do that really resonates with people. It's just like it's just nonstop. Even in the quiet moments, it still feels nonstop. Like it's gonna keep going.
Yeah, the tension. Keep the tension. That's something that I have thought about more and more over the last couple years, is momentum and pacing and keeping tension. And it's become something that I'm like very aware of now as I'm writing and editing. And it's just like, yeah, that's the that's the if it's not keeping tension and there's something that's taking away from it, then it needs to go. So I appreciate that you do the same thing. That's what makes or breaks the book.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
Now, are you one of those people that you see a scene, like you picture that scene in your head when you're writing?
Yeah. I visualize it all. It's like brain choreography. This person moves here. This person's going to do that. In the background, this is going on. I just see it all. It's the movie in my head that I try and get on the page. So,
Nice.
yeah, when I'm writing a book, I usually have the beginning and the end, and then maybe a few cool scenes, and then I just sort of go for it and try and connect it all as I go.
Okay, nice. So there's, interestingly enough, I'm getting some weird feedback, which I think is coming from your computer possibly, but it's me, but it sounds like I'm a demon.
Cool.
And it's very it's very like this guttural, like hell sound. I can't hear it now.
I turned my sound down, so maybe that'll help you.
That's good. I catch it every now and again, and I'm like, oh God, that's what I sound like. Oh, thanks, Steve. Okay, that's good to know. So somebody in the audience, thankfully, telling me I don't sound like a demon. Appreciate that.
I mean, if I
Um,
could sound like a demon, I totally would.
as an intimidation factor, it could be nice to just like throw that out. I don't know if I'd want to sound like that all the time.
Yeah,
You know,
maybe not all the
there's
time, I guess.
there's those moments where, uh, like as I'm petting the cat, I don't want to sound like a demon. Um, are you, I guess, on the same wavelength as the picturing scenes in your head? Do you ever listen to music when you write, or are you the silent?
No, I typically listen to something all the time.
Okay.
I don't really, I don't really like quiet. So I usually have movies in the background, and they're usually
Okay.
movies I've already seen, 10 or 15 times, and they're just sort of in the background. It's just white noise. Um, Music doesn't work for me. I tend to focus more on music than I do on a movie.
Okay.
And I find it actually influences things. So I tend to put things on that are sort of white noise. Um,
Hmm. Okay.
so and yeah, but I don't watch the movie. I don't even notice it.
Yeah.
I'm just in my own head at that point. But it sort of drowns out the other noises that are around.
Hmm.
Um, so it works for me in that
Okay.
way.
So, for instance, what's a movie that you would throw on that you've seen like a ton of times that you wouldn't be pulled into necessarily?
Yeah, I'll put on uh, the Dawn of the Dead remake. I'll put that on a lot.
So
It's
good.
got cool soundtrack too. I do get kind of pulled out by some of the song choices, like the when the credits roll and Jim Carroll band starts playing. I'm automatically like I'm like I just stop and look at it.
Mhm.
um, there's a few other song choices in there that with that lounge version of Down with the Sickness
Oh
sort of
yeah.
snaps me out of my writing sometimes.
Hmm.
But so Dawn of the Dead, the remake will be one. Alien a lot of times. Aliens, Alien 3, and the other ones if I'm in the mood. I never do Alien Resurrection, but the, the rest of them, sure. Um, what else? Return of the Living Dead, Repo Man is a favorite. There's
Okay.
there's a lot of like punk rock going on in those.
Yeah.
So I do get pulled out. But there are other things like Kroll. I don't know if you ever seen the movie Kroll.
Oh, I haven't seen it, but I definitely know what it is. Yeah.
It's amazing. It's a real treat of a bad fantasy movie. Um, and it has an amazing score. I say that not sarcastically at all. It has one of the most amazing scores um, for a movie that didn't do very well. Uh,
Hey, there's,
yeah.
there's all kinds.
Mm.
Um, I believe that Krull is on Tubi right now,
You should probably check it out.
quite possibly. We've been doing like a revisit of a bunch of old comedy movies, and it popped up as a suggestion at one point. So yeah, I will have to check it out.
It's gonna blow your mind.
Um,
You're gonna go look for like gray and black leggings to wear around.
oh
Um,
God, I mean I already have plenty of black leggings to wear around, but
you
no,
need
I'm
gray
not
and
a
black
leggings
striped ones though.
person. Um, but yeah,
I saw
that
someone shout
and
out the glaive. The glaive will blow your mind. It looks like the most unwieldy weapon that was ever invented.
okay, all right.
It's so good.
It's on the list, that and Tank Girl, which is the other one that people have been telling me to watch. So I'll I'll add that to the list. Maybe it'll be a twofer. Um, yeah, I cannot put on a movie no matter how many times I've seen it, I cannot put on a movie and not watch it. Like it's just, and I have movies that I will put on and like cook dinner or something and try to just have it as background noise, but there's no way. Like
No way.
Jaws pulls me in every time. Doesn't matter how many times I've seen it. I'm just like, I'm there for the shark. Wizard of Oz, same thing. Can't do it. But music, I can put on one song on repeat and just like baseline lose myself in that.
Yeah.
Because it's the repetitiveness. It's just the same thing over and over. So it's easy. So now we talk about the upcoming books.
Sure.
We're going to talk about the first one, which is coming in. Is it coming in June or July?
It's the beginning of August, I believe. They
Okay.
keep messing with me. Matt and Alec keep messing with the dates on it. But I
Okay.
think they moved. It was going to be end of July, and then they were like, "Well, we want it on a Tuesday, which is the traditional books come out day."
Yep.
So it got pushed into August.
Okay. So that is with Tenebrous Press. That is We Like It Cherry. And that it is an Arctic horror, indigenous kind of cosmic, possibly, type
It's got
thing.
weird stuff. It's weird.
And and so I wondered what you could tell us about it without, giving any spoilers.
Okay. Yeah. So We Like It Cherry is the story of this guy who's sort of he's on TV, but it's sort of a dead end gig. It's like one of those shows that they do where they're like, oh, we got people of color on this show. But it's like, like 2 a.m. on Wednesdays or something, and no one really cares or watches it. And his job is to kind of go around to all the indigenous celebrations and sort of document them and interview people. And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to do something bigger. And he gets invited by this person from a remote tribe in the Arctic to come and him and his documentary crew to come and film this rare celebration that just doesn't ever happen. And so they go up there, and it's been maybe a couple hundred years since it's happened. It just doesn't happen. Like certain conditions have to line up for it to happen, and it happens this year. And so they go up there, documentary crew, and they get to know these people in the Arctic and see their way of life and how kind of stripped down it is. And they're all doing this, not necessarily for the right reasons, but they go on this journey and they go on top of this glacier where they do this ceremony, and then it sort of gets a little hairy from there on out.
All right. Awesome.
Then it's a lot about survival at that point.
Okay. And it's a novel. It's a novel, right? So
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It sounds awesome. I definitely need to read that very soon.
Yeah, it's intense. I would say We Like It Cherry is probably, I don't know if you ever had this experience, but it was like when I was done, I was like, that thing is amazing. Like, I don't do that for myself, right? I'm usually more like, maybe some people will like it. It's okay.
Yeah.
But when I was finished with it, I was like, holy moly, it just goes, and it's nonstop. And, I'm now at the point where I'm worried I won't write anything as good. So there's that. So this might be the one. Hopefully it does well.
I mean, I think it's going to do very well. I actually just saw not an ad. Somebody Laurel Hightower had posted about it, because Tenebrous Press had posted about it on Blue Sky, and then she shared it because she has blurbed it, and so her blurb and Tim McGregor's blurb were showing on the post, and they both had really nice things to say about it. So, and they're both phenomenal authors. So I can only imagine how amazing it's going to be. And so that's coming at the beginning of August. And then the other book, which is coming later in the year, and I have once again forgotten the name of it because I'm terrible.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that book?
Well, that one's called One Shot. I actually sold it before I sold We Like It Cherry. So it's been gestating for a few years now, I think. But it's really a hard one to explain.
Okay.
It's about this guy who I've actually forgotten his name. It's been that long. It's about this guy. And he's not necessarily a good dude. He makes his living by being sort of like a surrogate impregnator, is his gig. And the reason being is A, he's kind of a dirtbag, and B, he needs the money, and C, he sort of wants to carry on the indigenous population, right? He's got enough blood quantum percentage to where his kids are indigenous, which would be very attractive to people that don't necessarily have a family of their own. And there are a lot of benefits to being indigenous, especially if you need healthcare or things like that. There are things we get that other people don't get. So that is his gig. And he has a grandfather who's very important to him, and he passes away, and he's ashes. And he determines, after a night of just bad decisions and bad things happening to him, he decides he's going to go take his grandfather across country to the reservation in his beat up jalopy of a car. And it does not go well for him. There's and it's sort of it's playing with the idea of sanity, and is this person messed up, or is this really happening? And so there's kind of that duality there, which is intriguing, and it goes into some interesting places. I mean, it's definitely it's hard to categorize. It's definitely horror, but it's I try and pride myself on writing unique things.
Okay.
Except for my zombie books, which are obviously zombie books, but everything else, I'm like, I want it to be original. I don't want people to read my book and go, oh yeah, that's like this thing over here. So it's doing its own thing, and it's enjoyable and weird. And I think some people will hate it, and some people will love that one. Like We Like It Cherry, I'm like, everyone's gonna like that one. But if you want to be challenged in the uniqueness of a story, I would say One Shot is the one.
Okay. All right. Sorry, the cat is stuck.
Oh wait, I just remembered. His name is One Shot.
Oh, well, there you go.
I totally forgot. Yeah.
I mean, that's not a name that I would assume would belong to a person. So that makes sense why you didn't remember. But it's also funny that it's the title. So what's funny about also the fact that you were saying it's weird. We just talked about weird horror last night. That was our topic of discussion, and trying to categorize what exactly weird horror is, which is not, to me, it's not easily definable. But Sam, who was on last night, was saying that it's, it's a sort of umbrella category and a bunch of other things fit underneath it. And I think existential might be possibly where one shot fits without knowing too much about it.
Yeah, it's definitely got some existential, like, who am I? What's going on?
Okay.
Sort of vibes. So definitely, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, the idea was that it was like body horror and splatter punk and an existential horror and there was one other one which I now can't remember. But yeah, that sounds awesome, and I can't wait to see what they do for a cover and when it comes out. I will definitely be adding it to my collection of your other works. So yeah, I guess that brings us to our last two questions of the night.
Okay.
These are kind of like the ending questions, which I ask everybody, and they do directly relate to our topic for the night. And the first is, what are some of um, your favorite movies or TV shows or books that do Indigenous horror really well?
Mm-hmm. TV shows. I'm enjoying Dark Wind. I don't believe it's
Mm-hmm.
an Indigenous author, but it looked like they got a lot of consultation. It just feels, uh, you know, genuine, which I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate. It doesn't feel forced or like they're just going through the motions of copying out the books.
Yep.
So Dark Wind is really good in the horror realm. Uh, with the fourth season of True Detective was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Like that was just really well done. I liked the variety of the characters. They weren't just your standard Indigenous characters. They were from a particular place and they had particular vibes and a different culture, which I thought was perfectly done.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, I just really admired the work they did on that. Books. I love Stephen Graham Jones's work. I think the Indian Lake trilogy is fantastic work all throughout. Just
Mm-hmm.
to see the growth of that character and the difficulties in there. I already mentioned Tiffany Morris's Green Fuse Burning, which is
Mm-hmm.
amazing. Um, I read a book by Nick Medina. Gosh, I can't remember the name, but I like that author. I think he's got another one coming out. I'll be checking that out. Movies. Uh, Blood Quantum was a indigenous zombie movie. Um, really well done. It's sort of
Yeah, I
uh,
wanted to see that. I
yeah, it's
remember
cool.
that.
Yeah, the gore is good. The effects are awesome. Um, it's not perfect, but it's better than a lot of the zombie movies I've seen out there. Just in
Mhm.
general, I'm pretty hard on zombie movies, so I was thrilled with that one. And then, gosh, there is just not a ton of indigenous horror movies that I like.
Mhm.
A lot of them are just sort of exploitive and
Sure.
um, not well thought out. I'm hoping there's an uptick in that.
Yeah.
If someone wants a script for We Like It Cherry, I'll write it for you, and you can make that, and it'll be excellent. But yeah, those are the things I'm definitely into within that category. I'm currently reading uh, I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. Like
Mhm.
every year, people have been getting me like gift cards to Powell's. Um,
Oh yeah.
and so I usually read on like a Kindle or my phone. And so then I go there and get these books and I just go through them. And that one's been sitting around since my birthday because I just went through a stack of things. And I was like, I'm going to save that one for last. So that's the one I'm on now.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say, I think I have both of Nick Medina's last two books.
Was it Sisters of the Lost Tribe? Is that the
Sisters
one?
of the Lost Tribe.
That's the one I read, yeah.
And then there's, is it a summer camp one? Something about a summer camp, I think. It's going to kill me that I can't think of the name. But I have both. Yeah, I've been looking forward to reading those too. And then Erica T. Worth, I have a couple of hers to read also.
Yeah, she's next on my list. I'm aware of her, but I haven't read any, but I'm looking forward to checking out her work. I've heard good things about it. So
yeah. Yeah. God, I feel like, oh yeah, The Buffalo Hunter be the newest Stephen Graham Jones. And I've got to say I'm a little sad that I did not pre-order that because it feels like every single person and their mother has that book right now. And
I have a copy of it, yeah.
and I'm just like, well, shit. Why? What was I doing? Like, and I'm not like somebody around here's got to have it. I'm sure one of the bookstores near me has got to have it, or maybe not. Maybe they've all been sold out at this point. But that's definitely on the list of things to read as well. In terms of new releases, also. Last question. Where can people find out more information about you and your upcoming books?
Let's see. I have a website that I update maybe once every 3 months. So there's that. I do have quite a large Facebook following because I think that's the one social media I was doing when I first started. So on my author Facebook page, if you just do a search for Jacy Morris author, you should find me. And I have other social medias that are, if you just search my name, I'm there, I guess. I usually just do the updates. Facebook is probably the most thorough one because I just have more room and I get more interaction there from people that just like my stuff. But my website has things, but I mean, honestly, the Facebook page is probably the best place to find me. And then if you have my newsletter, which you can get through my website, which is just jacymorris.com, I do monthly updates there that kind of catch you up on everything. If you're not into chasing me around, I'll shoot something into your inbox. And yeah, and that's it.
All right. Awesome. Well, we've reached the end of our episode, and I want to thank you for coming out tonight. Tonight here, clearly very day there.
Still day. Still got an hour and something of daylight.
Yeah. Thanks for coming out and talking with us this evening and getting people all interested in your new stuff. For the people who need a reminder of what's coming out, we have We Like It Cherry coming from Tenebrous Press at the beginning of August, and we have One Shot from Cemetery Gates coming.
No, Torrid Waters and Crystal Lake Publishing.
No, God, Torrid Waters. God, I'm sorry. I have just like the worst brain. Torrid Waters, Crystal Lake Publishing, One Shot coming this fall. So get on those two books make sure that you are on Jacy's newsletter. And we're taking a break from Winterviews next week. Thank God, because it's been 10 weeks of stuff, and I go to AuthorCon next week. So that's where I will be instead of here. And when we get back the first week of April, we'll have 2 more episodes, and those will be the last 2 episodes for this season. We will have Rowan Hill on April 3rd, and we'll be talking about space horror that evening. And then on April 10th, we will have Radar Steel on, and we'll be talking about my all-time favorite subject, grief horror. So make sure that you are coming back for those episodes. And if you missed an episode, you can watch all of them on the YouTube channel. There's a whole playlist full of all the episodes and all the previous seasons if you want to watch those. Thanks again for coming out, and we will see you another time.
All right.